Throughout history, some of the most chilling crimes have occurred within the walls of what should be the safest place, home. Family massacres are particularly unsettling because they involve betrayals that defy human understanding. These horrifying acts, often fueled by rage, jealousy, greed, or deep psychological disturbances, remind us that even those closest to us can become the greatest threats. In this documentary, we will explore 5 of the most terrifying family massacres, cases so shocking and brutal that they continue to haunt investigators and the public alike. These are stories of shattered trust, unimaginable violence, and the dark secrets hidden behind closed doors. Prepare yourself for a journey into the depths of human cruelty as we unveil 5 horrifying family massacres that will keep you up at night. The Watts family murders, 2018. One of the most shocking and disturbing family murders in modern history took place on August 13, 2018 in Frederick, Colorado. Chris Watts, a seemingly loving husband and father, murdered his pregnant wife Shanann Watts and their 2 daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, in cold blood. What makes this case particularly horrifying is not just the brutality of the crime, but the cold, calculated deception that Chris displayed in the aftermath. Before the murders, Chris and Shanann Watts appeared to be the picture-perfect American family. Their social media profiles were filled with happy family photos, vacation snapshots, and videos of Chris playing with his daughters. Shanann, who worked as a promoter for a health and wellness company, often posted about her love for her husband, unaware of the dark thoughts lurking beneath his calm exterior. However, behind closed doors, their marriage was deteriorating. Financial troubles, arguments, and Chris's growing detachment created cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship. The final blow came when Chris began an affair with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger, a woman who was unaware that he was planning something so sinister. On the early morning of August 13, 2018, Shanann returned home from a business trip. She was 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, whom they planned to name Nico. Surveillance footage captured her walking into the house for what would be the last time. In a moment of pure evil, Chris strangled Shanann to death in their bedroom. Their daughters, Bella and Celeste, who were likely awake during the attack, became his next targets. He loaded their mother's lifeless body into his truck, and with his daughters still alive and confused, he drove them to an oil field where he worked. Upon arriving at the location, Chris smothered Celeste first, while Bella watched in horror. Her final words, "Daddy, no," still haunt those familiar with the case. After murdering his daughters, he dumped their bodies into oil tanks and buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. In the days that followed, Chris pretended to be a grieving husband and father, pleading for his family's safe return in news interviews. However, investigators quickly noticed his unusual behavior, including his lack of emotion and inconsistent statements. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's house captured Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning, contradicting his claim that he had no idea where his family was. His deception began to crumble when he failed a polygraph test, leading to his shocking confession. Chris initially blamed Shanann for the murders, claiming she killed their daughters in a fit of rage, but evidence overwhelmingly proved that he alone was responsible. Facing mounting pressure, he pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole. His case remains one of the most disturbing examples of familicide, leaving people questioning how a seemingly normal husband and father could commit such unimaginable evil. This tragic case serves as a horrifying reminder that monsters sometimes wear the mask of an ordinary man. The Amityville Horror Murders, 1974. The Amityville House in New York is one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history, forever associated with horror, mystery, and the supernatural. This eerie reputation stems from the brutal murders committed by Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. on November 13, 1974. On that fateful night, DeFeo shot and killed his entire family, his parents and 4 younger siblings, as they slept in their beds. This gruesome act not only shocked the local community, but also became the basis for one of the most famous haunted house legends of all time. At around 3:15 a.m., Ronald DeFeo Jr. used a .35 caliber Marlin rifle to slaughter his parents, Ronald Sr. and Louise DeFeo, along with his siblings Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and John, 9. Each victim was shot execution style, and strangely, despite the loud gunfire, no neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. Even more unsettling, all 6 family members were found lying face down in their beds, with no signs of struggle or an attempt to escape. DeFeo initially claimed that the murders were the work of a mob hitman, but his story quickly unraveled under police questioning. Eventually, he confessed to the killings, coldly stating, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop." DeFeo's motives remain unclear. Some reports suggest he was driven by hatred toward his abusive father, while others point to drug-induced paranoia and psychosis. Throughout the years, he changed his story multiple times, even claiming that his sister Dawn helped him and that she was the one who killed the younger siblings before he shot her. These inconsistencies only added to the mystery surrounding the case. Another chilling element is the lack of evidence of sedatives in the victims' systems. If the gunshots were loud enough to wake the neighborhood, why did none of the family members react or try to escape? Some speculate that an unknown force paralyzed them in their sleep, feeding into the paranormal legends surrounding the house. 1 year after the murders, the Lutz family moved into the Amityville house, but fled after just 28 days, claiming they experienced terrifying supernatural events, demonic voices, strange odors, and objects moving on their own. Their story became the foundation for books, movies, and documentaries, fueling the legend of the Amityville Horror. While skeptics argue that the hauntings were a hoax, the real horror remains the brutal murder of an entire family, a tragedy that still haunts true crime enthusiasts to this day. The Bain Family Massacre, 1994. The Bain family murders, which took place on June 20, 1994 in Dunedin, New Zealand, remain one of the country's most infamous and hotly debated criminal cases. 5 members of the Bain family, Robin, 58, Arawa, 50, Arawa, 19, and Stephen, 14, were found shot to death in their home. At first, it appeared to be a tragic case of murder-suicide, with the father, Robin Bain, as the prime suspect. However, as the investigation unfolded, suspicion turned toward the only surviving family member, David Bain, 22, igniting a legal battle that would span decades. On the morning of June 20, 1994, David Bain made a distressed 111 emergency call, telling the operator, "They're all dead." When police arrived, they found a gruesome scene. Each family member had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. The father, Robin Bain, was discovered in the living room with a gunshot wound to his temple, leading investigators to initially believe he had killed his family before taking his own life. However, inconsistencies in the evidence soon cast doubt on this theory. The key factors that shifted suspicion onto David included gunpowder residue on David's hands, suggesting he had fired the weapon, his bloody fingerprints on the rifle which belonged to him. Laniette, the 18-year-old daughter, was shot 3 times, an unusual pattern for a suicide-murder scenario. Robin's lack of blood splatter, which was inconsistent with him having fired the final fatal shot on himself. In 1995, David Bain was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder. The prosecution argued that David, who had returned from his early morning paper route, systematically killed his family before staging the scene to make it appear like a murder-suicide. They suggested that David had a strained relationship with his family, particularly his mother and father, and that he saw himself as an outcast within the household. The jury found David Bain guilty, sentencing him to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years. However, this was far from the end of the story. Over the years, supporters of David Bain, including investigative journalist Joe Karam, argued that he had been wrongfully convicted. After multiple appeals and a review by the Privy Council in London, his conviction was overturned in 2007, and he was granted a retrial in 2009. In his second trial, Bain's defense team pointed to flaws in the original investigation, including the possibility that Robin Bain could have been the real killer. After one of the most highly publicized trials in New Zealand history, David Bain was acquitted of all charges. To this day, the Bain family murders remain a subject of fierce debate. While some believe David Bain was a wrongly convicted man, others are convinced he got away with murder. Regardless of where the truth lies, this case remains one of New Zealand's most controversial criminal mysteries, still haunting the nation decades later. The Gwenn family murders, 2005. The Gwenn family massacre stands as one of the most horrifying crimes in American history, leaving behind a trail of devastation and heartbreak. On the night of May 16, 2005, convicted sex offender Joseph Edward Duncan III targeted the Gwenn family home in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, launching a brutal home invasion that resulted in the murders of Brenda Gwenn, her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, 37, and her 13-year-old son, Slade Gwenn. However, Duncan's crimes did not end with these killings. His true intentions were even more sinister. He kidnapped the two youngest Gwenn children, Dylan, 9, and Shasta, 8, and subjected them to weeks of unimaginable torture before Shasta was miraculously rescued, leading authorities to uncover unspeakable horrors. Duncan, a violent predator with a long history of sexual offenses, had been stalking the Gwenn family for days before he finally acted. Armed with a shotgun and zip ties, he broke into their home, overpowering the adults before binding, torturing, and bludgeoning them to death with a hammer. Slade, the eldest son, also fell victim to his merciless brutality. After slaughtering 3 members of the family, Duncan turned his attention to the youngest children, Shasta and Dylan. He abducted them from their home, taking them deep into the wilderness of Montana, where he subjected them to weeks of horrific abuse, torture, and psychological terror. For nearly 7 weeks, Shasta and Dylan endured unimaginable torment at the hands of Duncan. Tragically, Dylan was murdered during their captivity, leaving Shasta as the sole survivor. On July 2, 2005, in an astonishing turn of events, Shasta was spotted at a Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, sitting across from Duncan. A sharp-eyed waitress recognized her from missing person reports and quickly alerted the authorities. Police arrived within minutes, rescuing Shasta and taking Duncan into custody. Once in custody, Duncan confessed to his monstrous crimes, detailing the gruesome murders, kidnappings, and torture he had inflicted. Investigators soon linked him to other murders across multiple states, uncovering an even darker past. In 2008, Joseph Edward Duncan III was sentenced to death for his crimes. However, justice felt bittersweet. Nothing could erase the trauma Shasta endured or bring back her lost family. The Gwenn family massacre is a haunting reminder of the evil that can lurk in society. Shasta Gwenn's survival is nothing short of a miracle, but the horrors she faced will never be forgotten. This case remains one of the most chilling examples of predatory violence in U.S. history. The Ketty Cabin Murders, 1981. The Ketty Cabin Murders, one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved crimes in American history, took place on the night of April 11, 1981, in the small town of Keddie, California. In the remote Cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort, a gruesome massacre unfolded, claiming the lives of Glenna Sue Sharp, 36, her son John Sharp, 15, his friend Dana Wingate, 17, and ultimately her daughter Tina Sharp, 12, who went missing and was found murdered years later. The crime scene was a nightmarish sight that even seasoned investigators found deeply disturbing. The victims were bound with medical and electrical tape, brutally bludgeoned with a hammer, and stabbed repeatedly, with one of the knives bent from the sheer force of the attack. Blood splattered the walls, furniture, and floor, evidence of a prolonged and sadistic attack that suggested torture. Strangely, despite the horrifying violence, 3 young children, Sue's 2 youngest sons and their friend, were left unharmed, asleep in an adjacent room, raising questions about whether the killers intentionally spared them or simply did not notice them. Adding to the mystery and confusion, Tina Sharp's body was missing from the cabin, and it wasn't until 3 years later, in 1984, that her skull and remains were discovered nearly 100 miles away, deepening suspicions that there was a larger conspiracy or cover-up at play. Investigators were baffled by the crime scene, particularly the lack of forced entry, suggesting that the killer or killers were known to the victims. However, the case was mishandled, with lost evidence and delayed investigative efforts, leading to years of frustration and speculation. Over the decades, several theories emerged, including suspicions surrounding local criminals, corrupt law enforcement, and even the possibility of multiple perpetrators acting on personal vendettas or sinister motives. Some investigators pointed to Martin Smart, a local man with a history of violence, and his friend Beau Boubede, both of whom had reportedly expressed hatred toward Sue Sharp and had suspiciously left town shortly after the murders. Yet, despite new leads and modern forensic advancements, the case remains officially unsolved, haunting the families of the victims and true crime enthusiasts alike. The Keddie cabin murders continue to fuel eerie speculation, with many believing that the true killers were protected, evidence was suppressed, or that the full truth was never meant to be uncovered. Today, Cabin 28 has been demolished, but the horrific legacy of that tragic night endures, leaving behind unanswered questions, chilling theories, and a lingering sense of unease that keeps this case among the most terrifying unsolved mysteries in American history. The Turpin Family House of Horrors, 2018. The Turpin family case is one of the most shocking and horrifying cases of child abuse in modern history. For years, David and Louise Turpin subjected their 13 children to unimaginable torture, starvation, and imprisonment within the walls of their Paris, California home. Outwardly, the Turpins seemed like a normal, religious family, often dressing their children in matching outfits for pictures and social gatherings. However, behind closed doors, their home was a prison of horror, where the children endured years of neglect, malnutrition, and abuse. They were shackled to their beds for extended periods, deprived of food and hygiene, and forbidden from having contact with the outside world. The siblings, ranging in age from 2 to 29 years old, lived in filthy, unsanitary conditions, surviving on minimal rations while their parents feasted in front of them. The Turpins exerted absolute control over their children, using fear, manipulation, and psychological torment to keep them obedient. The children were denied education, barely able to read or write, and were rarely allowed to bathe, leading to severe health problems. Neighbors were unaware of the nightmare unfolding just feet away, as the Turpins took great measures to conceal their crimes, often appearing as a devout, homeschooling family. However, the truth would finally come to light when one courageous daughter, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin, made a daring escape in January 2018. She climbed out of a window and ran to the police, carrying a cell phone with disturbing evidence of her siblings' suffering. When authorities arrived, they found a scene of pure horror: children chained to beds, covered in filth, and severely malnourished. Some of the adult children were so small and underdeveloped that police initially thought they were minors. The Turpins were immediately arrested, and their trial revealed even more disturbing details about the years of abuse. David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to multiple counts of child cruelty, false imprisonment, and torture, receiving 25 years to life in prison. Their children, now free, faced immense challenges adjusting to the outside world, having never experienced basic freedoms like attending school or eating a proper meal. While the case exposed severe failures in child protection services, it also highlighted the incredible resilience of the Turpin children who are now trying to rebuild their lives. The House of Horrors case remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist behind closed doors and the power of one brave voice to bring justice. The Lawson Family Christmas Massacre, 1929. What should have been a day of love, joy, and celebration turned into one of the most horrific family massacres in American history. On December 25th, 1929, in Germantown, North Carolina, Charles Davis Lawson, a 43-year-old tobacco farmer, committed an unspeakable act of violence against his own family. That Christmas morning, he brutally murdered his wife, Fanny, 37, and 6 of their 7 children: Marie, 17, Carrie, 12, Mabel, 7, James, 4, Mary, 4, Mary, 4, Mary, Lou, 4, Mary, Lou. Before taking his own life, the most chilling detail of this tragedy was that, just hours before the murders, Charles had taken his family for a professional portrait session, almost as if he was marking the occasion before ending their lives. At around noon, Charles ambushed his daughters Carrie and Mabel outside the house, shooting them with a shotgun before bludgeoning them to death to ensure they were dead. He then entered the family home, where he shot and killed his wife, Fanny, who was on the porch. He then systematically hunted down his children, executing them one by one. His eldest daughter, Marie, was reportedly in the kitchen baking a Christmas cake when her father turned the gun on her. He then murdered his younger sons, James and Raymond, before finally killing his 4-month-old baby, Mary Lou, who was beaten to death rather than shot. The only survivor was his eldest son, Arthur Lawson, 16, who had been sent on an errand to town, unknowingly escaping the massacre. After killing his family, Charles walked into the woods near the home, paced around a tree, and then turned the gun on himself. To this day, the motive behind the massacre remains unknown. Some speculate that Charles suffered from a head injury, as he had experienced a mysterious head trauma shortly before the killings. Others suggest that he may have discovered a dark family secret, with rumors circulating that he had been sexually abusing his daughter, Marie, and killed his family out of shame. The Lawson home became a macabre tourist attraction, with visitors coming to see the place where such a gruesome event took place. The infamous Christmas cake that Marie had baked remained untouched for years, a haunting reminder of the holiday that turned into a bloodbath. Decades later, the Lawson Family Christmas Massacre remains one of America's most disturbing true crime cases, a chilling reminder of how darkness can lurk beneath even the most festive occasions. The Bever Family Murders, 2015. The Bever Family Massacre, one of the most disturbing cases of familicide in modern history, occurred on the night of July 22, 2015 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. 2 teenage brothers, Robert Bever, 18, and Michael Bever, 16, carried out a meticulously planned attack on their own family, brutally murdering their parents and 3 younger siblings in cold blood. The brothers had been obsessed with mass murder, drawing inspiration from infamous serial killers, and planned to use their family home as the starting point for a larger killing spree. However, their twisted plan was thwarted when one of their younger sisters miraculously survived and called 911, leading to their capture before they could continue their rampage. On that fateful night, Robert and Michael armed themselves with knives and other weapons before launching their attack. They first targeted their parents, David, 44, and April, 41, stabbing them repeatedly. Their younger siblings, Daniel, 12, Christopher, 7, and Victoria, 5, were also viciously murdered, suffering deep stab wounds to their necks and torsos. The scene was horrifying, with pools of blood soaking the carpets as the brothers systematically moved from room to room, eliminating their family members. However, 2 siblings survived the massacre. Their 13-year-old sister Crystal, who was gravely injured but managed to crawl to a phone and call 911, and their 2-year-old sister Autumn, who was spared, possibly because of her young age. Crystal's desperate call to authorities led to a swift police response, and when officers arrived, they found a blood-soaked crime scene that left even seasoned investigators in shock. Robert and Michael attempted to flee into the woods behind their house, but they were quickly apprehended by police. During interrogations, they showed little remorse, admitting that they had been planning the attack for over a year. They idolized mass murderers like the Columbine shooters, dreaming of making their own mark in history by killing their family and then going on a cross-country killing spree. Their ultimate goal was to become infamous and surpass the body count of previous mass murderers. In 2016, Robert Bever pleaded guilty to all 5 murders and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His younger brother, Michael, was tried as an adult and later sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 38 years. Their former home, which became a symbol of horror, was demolished and turned into a park. The Bever family massacre remains one of the most chilling cases of teenage killers, a terrifying example of how dark obsessions and violent fantasies can escalate into real-life horror. The Liskey Family Murders, 2010. On October 31, 2010, what should have been a peaceful Halloween morning turned into a nightmare for the Liskey family in Martin, Ohio. William B.J. Liskey Jr., a 24-year-old man with a history of mental illness and violent outbursts, brutally murdered his father, stepmother, and stepbrother in their own home. What made the crime even more chilling was the fact that after committing the murders, BJ calmly attended church with his family's bodies still inside the house, as if nothing had happened. BJ had long been a source of fear and concern for his family. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, he struggled with severe mental health issues and had a history of violent behavior. His father, William Lisk Sr., 53, had worked tirelessly to get him treatment and keep the family together. But BJ's condition continued to deteriorate. Over the years, his violent outbursts escalated, leading to multiple incidents where he attacked family members. At one point, he had even threatened his stepmother, Susan Liskey, 46, with a knife, leading to his brief institutionalization. However, despite these warning signs, BJ was often released back into the home, which ultimately set the stage for the tragic events of that fateful night. On the night of October 3, 2010, BJ had spent the evening at his father's house. The next morning, his stepbrother, Devin Griffin, 16, returned home after staying the night at a friend's house. Devin went about his routine, even playing video games for a while before noticing that the house was eerily quiet. When he went to check on his family, he made a gruesome discovery. His mother, stepfather, and stepbrother had all been brutally murdered in their beds. William Lisk Sr. and Susan had been shot multiple times, while his stepbrother, Derek Liskey, 23, had been bludgeoned to death with a blunt object. In shock, Devin called 911, describing the scene as something out of a horror movie. Meanwhile, BJ attended a church service as if nothing had happened, before later being found and arrested at a family cabin. BJ Liskey pleaded guilty to the murders in 2011 and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, in 2015, he was found dead in his prison cell, an apparent suicide. The Liski family tragedy remains a haunting example of how untreated mental illness, combined with a history of violence, can lead to unimaginable horror. It also serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of failing to address warning signs before it is too late. The Setagaya Family Massacre, 2000. One of Japan's most mysterious and horrifying unsolved crimes is the Miyazawa Family Massacre, a case that has baffled investigators for over 2 decades. On the night of December 30, 2000, an unknown intruder entered the Setagaya district home of the Miyazawa family and brutally murdered all 4 members: Father Mikio, 44, Mother Yasuko, 41, daughter Nina, 8, and son Rei, 6. What makes this case even more disturbing is the killer's bizarre behavior. After committing the murders, the intruder stayed in the house for hours, ate food from the family's kitchen, used their bathroom, and even left behind DNA evidence and fingerprints, yet was never caught. The Miyazawas lived in a quiet residential area of Setagaya, Tokyo, next to a park. On the night of the attack, it is believed that the killer entered through a second-floor window, possibly breaking in around 11:30 p.m. He first strangled young Rei in his bedroom, then viciously attacked Mikio on the staircase, stabbing him multiple times with a kitchen knife. He then murdered Yasuko and Nina in another room, inflicting dozens of stab wounds, suggesting extreme rage and overkill. But the horror didn't end there. Instead of fleeing immediately, the killer made himself at home. He ate food from the refrigerator, drank tea, and used the family's toilet without flushing. He even logged onto the family's computer, possibly in an attempt to access the internet, leaving behind digital traces. Most disturbingly, he stayed in the house for hours, with some reports suggesting he left sometime in the morning. Before leaving, he discarded his clothes, leaving behind a sweater, scarf, and even a hip bag, all covered in DNA evidence. Despite an unprecedented police investigation, the killer was never identified. Authorities retrieved his DNA, analyzed his fingerprints, and even traced his clothing and shoes to specific stores in Japan and Korea. The DNA analysis suggested the suspect had mixed East Asian and European ancestry, an unusual genetic background in Japan. However, even with over 1,000,000 leads and multiple suspects, no arrests were made. More than 2 decades later, the Miyazawa Family Massacre remains one of Japan's most chilling cold cases. The fact that the killer left so much evidence yet evaded capture has led to numerous theories, from a professional assassin to a disturbed drifter. However, the lack of closure continues to haunt both investigators and the public, leaving this crime as one of the most terrifying mysteries in Japanese history.